So come on, come with me, grab your suitcase, we're going on a trip. Good morning, HFC kids. We are so pumped to be back for another week of Joseph. Things are starting to open up. Maybe your life is starting to resume a little bit back to normal. I was able to get a haircut yesterday and my bangs are back and I'm so excited. But it's also been raining all week, so that's kind of been a bummer. Hopefully it'll feel a little bit more like summer and we'll be able to go out to eat and we'll be able to eat ice cream on our porches and everything, and summer is gonna be so fun. But today we're going to be learning more about Joseph and having some fun with that. So this week we're learning about God's plan and how God's plan is bigger than our own. And I have these on our Google Drive for this week that are called Your Big Plan. And if you picked up a packet or a box, then you should have one of these already in that. But it's called Your Big Plan. If you don't have one of these papers or if you can't print one out, it's super simple. You can do one on your own. But it says that you're going on a vacation completely, that you can plan completely yourself. And you don't have to ask any adults permission for anything. You don't have to figure any of that out, but you can plan it completely on your own. So I filled out mine and I said I would go to China. And I would go with my mom. My mom wouldn't help me plan it because this is my plan. This is my trip. So I would take my mom with me because I know that we would have a lot of fun together. And how am I going to get there? I'm going to drive to the airport and then I'm going to fly to China. Probably not right now because there's still so many restrictions on airports and international travel. But when I have my own freedom back, we can go to China. That's my plan. And I put on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, what I'm planning on doing all those days. And I said that some days I'm gonna just sleep and look around and hang out at the hotel. And then I'm gonna go to Shanghai and I'm gonna fly to a panda habitat and hold baby pandas because I love pandas. And that's my dream, is to hold a baby panda. And there's only one place in the whole world that you can do that, and that's in China. So I would go there and I would visit the different sites in the area and restaurants, eat some good Chinese food. I love Chinese food. And then I made a list of some things that I need to take with me. So I made sure that I'm taking my toothbrush, shampoo, some hats, some shirts, some pants, headphones, some books, my passport. I can't go all the way to China without a passport. So I made a list of all those things I need. If you want to do this with your family, that could be really fun. You can either do it as a whole family together, planning your dream vacation, or you can do it on your own and see what's different. Maybe one of you just wants to go to Disney World. Maybe someone wants to go to the beach. Maybe someone wants to go to Kings Island, and you can figure out where you would go if you didn't have any restrictions, if it was completely your plan and you got to do what you wanted to do. That's what we're talking about this week, is our plans. But we're also talking about how God's plans are bigger than our plans. So this week we're continuing the story of Joseph. And if you remember, he was living with his brothers in a land called Canaan. And he was his father's favorite son. And he was treated differently and favorited over the other brothers. And they got really jealous. So they sold him to some people on their way to Egypt. And he was there and he was stuck in slavery. And the brothers just told their father, Jacob, that Joseph had died. He was attacked by animals. So Jacob thinks that Joseph is dead. The brothers probably think he's dead by now, or he's a slave. And actually, Joseph has now become basically the prince or the king or the highest governor of all of Egypt. There's the Pharaoh, and then there's Joseph. They're top dogs running Egypt together. And the reason he got there was because he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. And we see in Genesis that his interpretation of the dreams were coming true. He was put in charge that when 7 years of famine came to the land of Egypt, Joseph was supposed to store away some of the food in the 7 good years, so when the famine came along, there would still be food left over for the Egyptians to have, so that they wouldn't starve and so that the country wouldn't die out, because they were a pretty powerful country. So the Pharaoh put him in charge of that, and he was super powerful. People bowed before him. He had all kinds of riches. He lived in the palace. It was the best life. And that's probably not at all what his brothers were expecting Joseph to be doing. So today we're going to be talking about how Joseph's life and Joseph's brother's life continue and how they interact some. And to do that, we're going to go a little bit on a journey to Egypt and Canaan. So come on, come with me, grab your suitcase, we're going on a trip. Welcome to Egypt. We have made it safe and sound, and we are going to learn about what Joseph was doing here in Egypt during the time of the famine. So, our story today takes place in Genesis chapter 41. Actually, it takes place over the course of several chapters because we're going to be going back and forth between what was happening in Egypt and what was happening in Canaan. So, right now in Egypt, it's the time of plenty. God has blessed the land of Egypt with so much food and such strong cattle and everything. They have all the meat they want, they have all the grain they want, they have all the food and water that they need. But as Joseph said in the dream, this was supposed to last for 7 years, and then at the end of those 7 years, it was supposed to become a famine. And a famine is when there's no food and there's not enough to take care of the animals, so the animals die, and that means there's no meat, and then the people could starve. So during that time of plenty, Joseph took a little bit away each year so that there could be some stored away when the famine came, there would still be some food that was in storage that they could get out and not starve. And in Genesis chapter 41, verse 53, it says, "The 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was still bread," which is different than what Joseph had originally thought. He talked about the famine in Egypt, but when the famine actually came, they realized it wasn't just Egypt. It was the whole land, including the countries around Egypt. But they didn't have as good of a leader that had been as blessed by God as Egypt had, because they didn't have Joseph. So other people were starving too. And they started to realize how special Joseph really was. And in verse 55, it says, "When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, 'Go to Joseph, and what he tells you to do, do it.'" So now we're going to go to Canaan and see what's happening there. Because if there's a famine in all the lands, that means that Joseph's dad and family don't have any bread either. And Joseph wasn't there anymore to take care of them or to lead them. So they're probably getting pretty hungry right about now. Are you ready to head to Canaan with me? We're gonna have to pack our suitcase back up and head back out. Let's go. And now we have arrived in Canaan. It is time for us to learn a little bit about what Joseph's brothers and father have been doing while Joseph has been in Egypt, first as Potiphar's servant, then when he was in prison, and now that he's the governor. And we've had these 7 years of plenty, but since they didn't have Joseph's leadership, they didn't know to prepare for the 7 years of famine. So they've probably eaten a ton, gotten really wealthy because they have all this stuff, and now there's no food and there's nothing to drink. So we're gonna dive in to Genesis once again. And we're going to start in chapter 42, where Jacob, not Joseph, Joseph's in Egypt. Jacob looks at his sons and says in verse 1, "When Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he looked at his sons and said, 'Why are you just looking at one another?' And he says, 'Behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for our family there, that we may live and not die.'" So not only is God blessing Joseph, but he's so powerful that even the surrounding lands know that he's doing big things. But Jacob doesn't even realize that the person doing these great things is his son Joseph, because remember, Jacob thinks that Joseph is dead. So his sons get all their stuff together and they pack up, and it's time for them to head to Egypt. So let's go right back. Now we are back in Egypt, and we're learning about how when Joseph's brothers came, they may have thought that their brother was in slavery or he was dead, but when they got there, they saw that something was completely different. So Joseph's story keeps going in Genesis chapter 42, and it says in verse 6, Joseph was governor over all the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land, and Joseph's brothers came, and they bowed themselves before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. "Where did you come from?" he said. And they said, "We came from the land of Canaan. We came to buy food." And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they didn't recognize him. Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed, and he said to them, "You are spies. You just came to see the nakedness of the land." So he realizes while they're there bowing before him that he had that dream when he was a kid, that someday he was going to be in a position that his brothers were going to bow down before him. And they all thought he was crazy for even saying something like that. But here it is. It's happening. His brothers are bowing there, and they don't even recognize him. They don't even realize that that's him. So he decides to give him a little bit of a hard time. And instead of saying, "Hey guys, it's me, Joseph," he says, "You're spies, and you've come to see the nakedness of the land." So he basically says, you guys have come to laugh at us and say that Egypt is in the middle of a famine and Egypt is terrible, and now is the time to attack Egypt because they're not very strong. But he was making all that up just to see how his brothers would react. And then it says, they said to him, "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." They kept calling themselves his servants. Instead of him being the little twerp brother, they're his servants now. And he's become so much more powerful than them. So we're going to see what Joseph does with this new power. In verse 15, it says that Joseph is going to test them. It says, "By this you shall be tested in the life of Pharaoh. You shall not go to this place unless your brother comes here." He says, now, you say that you're all brothers, but turns out they told him they had another little brother at home, Benjamin. But he thought maybe they were lying, or they were going to continue to be mean to Benjamin just like they had been mean to him. And he says, "You're not allowed to get any of this food. I'm not going to sell you anything until you've come and brought me your brother and given me updates on how your father's doing." So he's tricking them to see, how are they treating Benjamin now? How is their father doing? What does their family look like anymore? He has all these questions, but he doesn't want to admit to them quite yet or trust them to see if they can really know that Joseph is the governor. In verse 24, it says, Joseph turned away from them and he wept. He cried because he didn't know what to do with his brothers there in front of him. He didn't know how to handle this. It was amazing. He returned to him and he spoke to them, and he decided to take Simeon from them, and he bound him before their eyes. And he gave orders for them to fill their bags with enough grain to get home and replace the man's money in the sack and to give them provisions for the journey, and this was done for them. So he said, just to make sure that you come back, I'm going to keep Simeon here so that when you go to Canaan, you can come back with Benjamin and see if you can get your brother back then. And that way I can see if you're truly honest. So that's his little trick. And now his brothers have to go back to Canaan. So you ready to go back? We're going back. Here we go. Grab your suitcase. We're going back to the land of famine. So now we're back in Canaan for the second time. And this time they've been sent back to see their father from Joseph. So we're going to pick back up on our story in Genesis chapter 43. And it says that they came back and they realized that Joseph had put money in their bags. He sent them with enough grain to go home, but they opened up the bags and they realized not only did he send us the grain, but he gave us the money that we were supposed to pay him for the grain. So it basically was like they stole it because they never actually paid for it. They took their money back and they still took the grain. And that's not fair. And that would have been really terrifying. So they came back and they were like, Father, so we can't go back because we're gonna be in trouble when we go back because he probably realizes that we took all this grain and we didn't even pay for it. So we're in chapter 43, verse 6. And it says that before they went back, they realized they have to go back because they left Simeon. And in order for them to get Simeon back, they had to go back and get him, but they couldn't go back because they would be in trouble because of the grain, and they had to take Benjamin with them. So they tell their father, hey, we actually need to take Benjamin with us. We can't just go back quite yet. And it says in verse 6, Israel said, why do you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother? Why did you even tell him that you had a brother? Now he has something to use against you. No wonder he told you to go back. You should have just kept your brother Benjamin a secret. And then it says in verse 14, that may God Almighty grant you mercy before man, and may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. And as for me, I am bereaved of my children. I am bereaved. So he says, I guess in order for us to get Simeon back, and in order for you to get food, I have to send Benjamin with you. And Judah pled before him and said, if something happens, blame me. I know you're still upset about Joseph, but you gotta trust us, otherwise we're gonna die. So he sends them back and he says, fine, go back to Egypt, take Benjamin with you, bring back Simeon next time. Like I told you the first time, come back with enough food to get us through this famine. So now that they have everything they need, with a little bit of fear because they have that money in their bags, they gotta go back to Egypt. Back in Egypt, part 3. We're continuing our story in Genesis chapter 43. And as we said before in Canaan, when they got home, they found out that they had all of this money still left in their bags that they were supposed to use to pay for the grain. So they have all their grain, but it turns out they didn't actually pay for it. So they're a little bit scared to go back and see Joseph again. Although they don't know it's Joseph, they just think that he's one of the governors that's in charge of the grain. And they don't want to see him because they're afraid that he'll be mad at him because they stole all this money and they're stressed, but they have to go back in order to get Simeon, and it's crazy right now. So we got to pick up in chapter 43, and they're stressed and they're saying, sir, we didn't mean to steal this money from you. We didn't mean to take it. We just got home and it was still there. We didn't mean to. I'm so sorry. Please don't be mad at us. And it says, Joseph replied, peace to you. Do not be afraid. For your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money. And then he brought Simeon back out to them. So since he came back, he fulfilled his promise. He gave them Simeon back, and he didn't even get mad at them. He just said that the reason they had money was because God had blessed them, which means they passed the test. They were willing to confess that they had done something wrong. They were willing to give back that money. They could have just gone home and kept all the money and kept all the grain, but they came back. 1, because they cared about their brother, and 2, because they wanted to be honest with their leadership and say, hey, we didn't mean to steal this. So they passed both of those tests. And now he decides that he's going to celebrate them and he's going to make them feel loved and cared for under the leadership of Joseph. But they still don't even know that it's their brother. In 43 verse 27, it says, he inquired after their welfare and asked, is your father well? The old man that you spoke about, is he still alive? So he had to pretend that he didn't know that their dad was actually his dad. So they were like, oh yeah, our dad. Why do you care so much about our dad? And it says, They bowed their heads and prostrated themselves and said, he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your youngest brother whom you spoke to me? God be gracious to you, my son. And he goes and he gets to hug his brother. He runs and he grew warm for his brother and he sought a place to weep. But he couldn't run and hug him because he didn't want to let Benjamin know that he was actually Joseph. He's trying to cover himself. He's trying to hide so that they don't realize that it's him, because he still doesn't know how they're gonna react. Because last time he saw them, well, before all of this, was when they sold him. And so he's kind of nervous. And so he had to run out of the room. He was overwhelmed with emotions and he cried. And then finally he just washed his face and he controlled himself and he went back out. And he decides to throw a big feast for them and bless them and make them feel loved and cared for. And after they've been doing so well, he decides to give them another test. In verse 1 of chapter 44, it says, he commanded the steward of his house, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put money in the mouth of each of their sack, which is normal. Giving them their money back, giving them some food, that's normal. But then he says in verse 2, put my cup, a silver cup, in with money, with the youngest's grain. And the servant did what Joseph told him. So he tricked him. He planted this cup in Benjamin's bag. And now Benjamin was going to be in even bigger trouble, because now he has the money, he has the grain, he's the youngest, he's probably not as good at defending himself. And now it looks like he's stolen precious silver from Joseph. And so this is another test. How is Benjamin going to respond? How are his brothers going to respond? And it says, all of chapter 44 is about Judah. One of the brothers who was really mean to Joseph came back to Joseph and said, hi, sir, I am so sorry that my brother stole, but he wouldn't have really done that. And he pleads for Joseph, or for Benjamin's life, to Joseph, and says, don't punish him, punish me, punish any of us, but we can't hurt our father. We can't let our dad be upset. Our dad Jacob, like, he first lost Joseph, he can't lose Benjamin too. And it breaks Joseph's heart, because he realizes that his brothers are now willing to protect their younger brother, even though they didn't protect him. So he goes back and he gathers the whole family together, all the sons, and he says, I'm not gonna punish you. And he pulls off his garments and says, I'm Joseph, look at me, listen to my voice, talk to me, I'm your brother Joseph. And he reveals himself to them. And he says, you said that I was dead, you told Father that I was dead, but now I'm alive. Hug me, embrace me, and go back and tell our Father that I'm alive. And when you go back and tell him he can come here too. And all of you can come back and you can live here, and I will bless you, because I have all this power now and I want to use it to bless you. I forgive you. God is so much bigger than anything you've done to me. And he actually says, as we're talking about this week, God's plan is bigger than our plan. He says, though you might have wanted to send me here to be a slave or to die, God wanted me to be here because he knew that I could save our family and the nation of Egypt. And his brothers, they all hug, and it's a beautiful moment. But now it's time for them to go back to Canaan and grab their father and bring him back to Egypt so that they can all be together again. So now we got to go back to Canaan and meet Jacob and see if they can bring them all back to Egypt, just as their brother Joseph has told them. So we're back in Canaan one last time. Joseph has told his brothers his true identity and said, go back and get my father. For now, you can live here. And you don't have to worry about starving in Canaan. You can come here and reap from all of the riches that I have as one of the leaders in Egypt. So they're going back. They have Simeon and Benjamin with them. But now that they realize that their brother Joseph is in power, they're very motivated to come back. This time, they're just coming back to get their father so that they can all be together in Egypt. So we're in Genesis again, chapter 45. And it says in verse 25, they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. And they told him, Joseph is still alive, and he's ruler over all the land of Egypt. And his heart, Jacob's heart, became numb, for he did not believe them. So they are here confessing to their father. They have to tell their father, we lied to you. He wasn't really hurt by wolves or any wild animals. We actually sold him to Egypt, and he's been alive and down there this whole time. And it says, when they told him all of the words of Joseph, which he said, and he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent with him so that they could bring Jacob home, the spirit of their father Jacob received. And Israel said, it is enough. My son Joseph is still alive, and I will go see him before I die. So they gather all of their things, and they began their journey for the last time to Egypt, so that Jacob could be reunited with his son Joseph, and their whole family could be together again in this rich new land. So let's head out. Now we're really moving out. We're not coming back to Canaan. We're moving. Let's go. Now we're back for the last time in Egypt. We're here. This is where the nation of Israel has come to stay. Joseph is big and powerful, and he's saving their whole family. He's using his riches to take care of them. And it says that he gets his chariot ready and drives out and meets them in the distance. And it's a beautiful picture. You should read it in Genesis. And Jacob sees his son that he thought was dead, and they're reunited, and it's beautiful. And now all of them, all of Joseph's nieces and nephews, and then all those cousins and all that family, all of the nation of Israel got to be safe in the town or in the nation of Egypt during this time of famine rather than dying. And that's where they stayed, and that's where they continued for a little while. But it shows that God's plan was so big that he was able to protect the nation of Israel. So, thanks for traveling with me. We're gonna head back to the HFC studio and see what this means in our memory verse continuing. So as we saw, God's plan in using Joseph to save Egypt was so much bigger than what his plan could have been for himself or what his brothers or father had planned for him. There was no one that expected Joseph to go from one of the youngest kids to being a ruler in Egypt that ended up saving their whole nation. But God knew, and God used his power to put Joseph in that position and save so many people, and it's so cool. Plus, it helped bring tons of riches to Joseph's family that would eventually become Jesus's family. So it's a pretty big deal. It's one of my favorite stories from the Bible, learning all about Joseph. And it also reminds me of our memory verse for this week, which is, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths, which is from Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. This week we have a special activity that goes with that verse, and it'll help you practice it a little bit more. I suggest you start by reading through the verse as a family or talking about it, trying to quote it yourself so that you're really familiar with it before you play the game, because part of the game is putting the verse in order. And if you don't know what order it's going to be in, you're not going to win the game. So basically, I'll show you how it works in just a second. You're going to use plastic cups and ping pong balls, as well as little slips of the verse. If you still have the verse left from when we did the game with Lena a few weeks ago, you can use those. You can create your own, or if you have one of those packets that I gave your family, there's a piece of paper in there that has all the verses in there as well. So you can cut those up, put those in the plastic cups, and bounce the ping pong balls to try and get them into the cups. If you get them in the cup, you can take the verse out and try and put the verse in order once you've gotten all the different slips. You'll see how that works in just a second. It was really fun to play. HFC kids, I'm so glad you joined me today as we traveled and learned about the story of Joseph. I hope you have fun with these activities like planning your vacation and bouncing some ping pong balls to try and figure out your verse for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll see you next week.